So I'm here today to talk to you about the differences we're seeing in our potato cultivars, depending if they're infected with haplotype A or B. To start with, I'm just going to touch on some of the research that's been done before on this topic, and then I'll introduce you a little bit to what we did on our project, and then I'll jump right into results on what we're finding so far. We'll look at the emergence differences, some of the plant tissue that we tested, and also the tubers that we harvested from the plants that grew from the infected tubers, and then where we're planning to go also with the project. So to begin with, there were two papers that sort of touched on this before. Henny et al. In 2010 did an experiment, and we believe that they were mostly working with haplotype B. They had about 40 to 20% emergence from their infected tubers, and they had really low positive testing for LSO. Only one plant came back positive and 2 seed tubers. However, in New Zealand, Pittman et al. In 2010 found very high emergence from their zebra chip infected seed tubers, and they found that most of them didn't show symptoms, but when they tested either the plant or the tuber itself, they had really high positive LSO results. And so they sort of brought this idea that maybe zebra chip that the psyllids could come to the plants in the field and spread zebra chip from infected seed sources. So how we started this is we grew our 8 cultivars in the plants until they just started to get tubers. And then we took a clip cage, which you can see in the top picture. It's just a little foam piece that we put on an individual leaf, and we put 2 psyllids into the clip cage, and we leave it on the plant for about 7 to 10 days. Then after that, we remove it and we just let the plants progress naturally, and we harvest the tubers at the end. Before we put them into storage to plant again, we check them for symptoms, see if they already have symptoms before storage, and we save a little piece for testing for DNA for LSO presence, and then we put them in storage, and then after about 3 or 4 months, we took them and planted them again, and we collected information on their emergence date, the emergence rate. When the plants came up, we collected tissue samples to test for LSO, and after those plants were finished growing and died, we harvested any tubers that came from those plants as well, and checked those for visual symptoms and tested for LSO, and weighed for differences in mass as well. So currently we've only finished 1 of 3 trials on this. We're mostly through with trial 2, but I'm only presenting on trial 1 right now. So based on the data we have so far, we have no differences in the percent of plants that emerge. So we looked at the plants that tested positive from the tuber for being A or B, and then we calculated the percentage of them which emerged into plants. And I included on the top just LSO in general, so you can see if it was above or below with A or B. And you can see A has a little higher emergence rate, but when you compare it statistically, it's not significant from B at all. And if you go down the line through the cultivars, A is Alturius, B is RB is Russet Burbank, Chieftain, Dakota Pearl, Nakota, Modoc, Snowden, and Pike. They sort of jump around as to whether A or B has a higher percentage, but when you compare them statistically with this data right now, there's no significance. And for Chieftain, Dakota Pearl, and Pike, we had no emergence for 1 of them right now. So in Chieftain, none of the B tubers emerged. In Dakota Pearl, none of the A tubers emerged. And in Pike, none of the B emerged. So we have no statistics on that data currently. When we look at the number of days that the plant waits until it emerges, there's also no statistical difference. When you look at overall the varieties. B is slightly later than A, but again, when you look in the specific varieties, it alters between A and B being earlier or later. Same goes for the number of days that the plant survives. Between all the cultivars, B survives just slightly longer, but it's 2 days longer, so it's difficult, statistically significant, and again, they kind of alter between the varieties. When I looked at the number of positive plants that we got, I went and made it a percentage of the plants that were emerged that tested positive. So you can see that for A across all the cultivars, it's just about 15%, and for B, it's 21%. And it looks to be pretty big differences between specific varieties in this area, but because there's a different number of samples for each. So if you look at Norcota, you would see 12% of the A tested positive and 50% of the B tested positive, which seems like it'd be a pretty big difference and pretty significant. But when you look at the B for Norcota, there was only 2 plants that came up, 2 plants that tested positive. So 1 of 2 is not a value that you can do significance on at this point. So that's why there's no significance at this point there. When we looked at the tubers that we collected from the plants that did emerge, there were visual symptoms in all of the tuber cultivars except for Alturius and Pike. And when we tested them for LSO, we did have some that came back positive, and I put their CT values on there just to show that these are tubers that were not inoculated but came from inoculated tubers and plants themselves, and they still show rather high CT values, getting 27, 26, definitely positive samples there. When we looked at the mass of the tubers that we collected from these plants, there also was a little bit of difference. When you look at Snowden, there's no significance right now, but the p-value that we got for that was 0.11. So I'm thinking maybe when we add in the 2 other trials of data, there could possibly be significance there, but currently they're all set at about equal values. So far in the first trial, this experiment, we found that there weren't any significant differences between the haplotype A and B in the plants. For the percent of emergence we have, the emergence date, the number of days the plant survives, the percentage of plants that test positive, or the mass of the tubers that we harvest in the end. There's visual symptoms seen in all of the varieties except for in Pike and Alturius. And when we test them, Russet, Burbank, Modoc, Snowden, and Chieftain test for LSO-A, and Norcota and Snowden and Dakota Pearl do for B. And I should also point out that for Chieftain and the Dakota Pearl, they're only shown in 1, but we only had emergence in those 2 haplotypes for those, so they could turn up to be in both. Like I said, we're only in the first of the 3 trials. The second trial is almost finished, so we're going to finish harvesting that probably when we get back from this meeting. And we will be able to look at the data for that trial. And then we're just working on the DNA extractions and the tubers coming out of stores for trial 3. So we'll get that planted and start collecting emergence data on that as well. I just want to thank Dr. Gudmestad for this project and working in his lab. The project was funded by a U.S. Potato Board task grant. Chris Johnson works in my lab, and he sort of advises me on the project and helps me understand things. Vanessa Johansen helped me with a great deal of the greenhouse work. Iman Wynn did most of the real-time calculations and data. And then there's a whole group of people back at our NDSU lab that helped with extractions and checking tubers for symptoms and everything